What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone.
Hi everyone. Thanks for tuning in today to my second episode. Today we're going to be talking about the worst humanitarian crisis in the world that we're facing right now. And no, it's not Syria. We're going to be talking about Yemen. Right now in Yemen, the Yemenis people are facing the worst famine that the world has seen in the past 100 years. In order for a famine to be declared, 3 conditions need to be met. Number 1, that at least 1 in 5 households are facing an extreme lack of food. Number 2, that 30% of children under 5 are suffering from acute malnutrition. And number 3, that 2 out of every 10,000 people are dying daily. And that's what Yemen is facing right now. And the saddest part about this imminent famine that Yemenis are facing is the fact that it is politically driven. So essentially the Yemenis people are being starved because of, number 1, the involvement of the United States in the war in Yemen. And I'm going to get into the history in a little bit. However, I'm going to explain why the Yemenis aren't getting food that they need. Multiple organizations like the UN Peacekeepers, IRC, International Rescue Committee, so many different organizations are trying to get into Yemen, right, to bring food, bring supplies, bring medication, help with clean drinking water. However, the main port in Yemen, where 70% of all the food and all of the medications and all of the supplies needed, the main port is being blocked by Houthi rebels, and they're suffering from airstrikes by the Saudi-led air bombing campaign. Going on in Yemen essentially is a civil war that has been going on since 2015. Now rewind a little bit, 2011, there was an Arab Spring across the Arab world, right, where multiple Arab nations rose up against their supreme leaders, things of that sort. Yemen was one of the nations that was inspired. They overthrew their President Ali Abdullah Saleh and replaced him with one of his lowers, President Hadi. Now, Saleh and also Houthi rebels are on one side of the civil war, so Saleh loyalists, and then Houthi rebels are on one side of the civil war, and on the other side we have the Saudi and United Arab Emirates, backed by the United States. So the United States is supplying Saudi Arabia with weapons and with money for arms to carry out their airstrikes against the Houthi rebels, right? Now, this is a typical proxy war. What is a proxy war? A proxy war is when 2 major nations are essentially using a smaller country to carry out their larger goals. Now, the United States, of course, is involved because they want to continue the war on terror, right? So Houthi rebels they were inspired by Hezbollah, which we see a lot of involvement in Syria right now. It's a bigger Shia rebel group, right? Shia is a sect of Islam. And although they're a little bit different from Hezbollah, that's really their inspiration. So the U.S. is trying to combat terrorism. Al-Qaeda was heavily involved right in Yemen as well. Al-Qaeda was and still is hanging bodies from bridges from different sects, Muslim sects that don't cover their face fully. Like there's multiple forms of terrorism that are going on in Yemen right now, besides the awful famine and basically forced starvation that Yemenis are facing. So my problem with what is going on is that I feel very disempowered, and I feel that, we're not hearing enough about Yemen in the news. I feel that we're not seeing enough about Yemen on my Facebook feed. We hear a bit about Syria, but the problem is, and the problem that I want to address on my show, is the fact that once we hear about, a death toll going up daily, once we realize that and accept that death and famine and war is a part of our daily lives, right? As Americans living in a first world country, we just normalize what goes on in a third world country, and it doesn't shock us anymore. But we should always be surprised by violence. We should always be surprised by the fact that, the world produces and grows enough food for everyone to eat 3 meals daily at least. However, just for political reasons, an entire country is facing starvation, right? So that is what my main problem is. And now this war has been going on really since 2015. What has happened? Prices have jumped as much as 40%, at least in the country's capital, Sana'a. And across Yemen, prices are up 20 to 30%. But most people have no idea really where their next meal is coming from, regardless. Now, since the war, some more statistics, 16,000 people have died, roughly. 3 million have been uprooted, and 22 million are in need of aid. Since June, things have escalated. The other largest issues is the lack of clean water. Only 1/3 of Yemenis people have access right now to clean water. So many people have lost their homes and are living on the street and drinking very dirty water, and cholera has become a huge issue across Yemen. What cholera is essentially a bacterial infection that is often deadly that comes from drinking dirty water. And the problem with the airstrikes that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are carrying out, backed by the U.S., is the fact that people are sick, yet they're bombing hospitals, they're bombing next to hospitals, they're bombing weddings, they're bombing funerals, they're bombing marketplaces, they're bombing schools. So they're bombing civilian centers, which is a war crime. I also want to give and bring attention to a very disturbing bus attack where 42 students were killed in northern Yemen due to a bomb that the UN is suspecting the US had supplied, right? And the US had declared that the bus was full of child fighters, right? Because it is very common for rebel-held countries that children join the rebel force and take up arms and fight amongst adults, right? So the U.S. is claiming that these children were child fighters. However, there was a video that surfaced that one of the children took on the bus a few minutes prior to the bombing, and it definitely showed that they were not child fighters, right? One of the most disturbing aspects of that was that a father had to identify his dead child, by their teeth alone. Just living in a first world country, these kind of things are so disturbing and shocking and unimaginable, right? But this is a fact of daily life in Yemen. And like I said, it's just hard to feel powerful because we sit here and we live our lives and we drink our clean water. My hair is wet. I just took a shower in water that is drinkable, right? I just thinking about how grateful we all should be, but also how guilty we are, how selfish it feels to, bathe for 10 minutes and waste gallons and gallons of water that is drinkable just to wash yourself, right? Things like that I think we all should be aware of, or at least in the back of our minds be thinking about people that don't know or where their next clean water, their next drink is coming from, right? Let alone their meal. For me also, I was just trying to think of ways that how Americans could help. And obviously there's donations to things like UNICEF and IRC. However, you can't even get it on a plane to Yemen. I mean, it's obviously marked an extremely dangerous place to be right now. But how do we convince our politicians, right, that are funding this war essentially and funding these airstrikes that are supposedly meant to stop the Houthi rebels, but they're bombing civilians, right, for years and years now, and this is going on across the world. But in Yemen right now, we need to get food to these people that are facing the worst famine. I mean, it's unheard of in the 21st century that we should be facing a famine so large, right? So it's really hard feeling disempowered in such a way. But I really want to bring light to the issue. And even Facebook faced some controversy this week because there were pictures that surfaced from a New York Times article of starving children, starving from acute malnutrition in Yemen. And Facebook had removed all of the posts because it was against community standards. I don't know if it was because it was too disturbing or if it was because it had some nudity in it. However, how else are people going to care? But on the other hand, are people going to be desensitized to it? But that's why I'm doing this show, because I want to bring some light and some facts about what is going on there right now while we're all sitting in our, the comfort of our lives here in America. But what is really going on, half a world away. So geographically, where is Yemen? Yemen is located below Saudi Arabia, so it's right across from Africa to the east, and it's separated by the Red Sea. People there practice Islam. There's been an escalation since June this year because Saudis have tried to reclaim the main port in Yemen, which has just led to a lot more violence, and now it's really hard for relief to get in. And now Yemen is the Arab world's poorest country. Who are the Houthi rebels being supported by? Now they're being supported by one of the U.S.'s enemies, which is Iran. Iran is giving the Houthi rebels supplies and arms and funding them to continue this civil war. So like I said, it's a proxy war between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia on one side against Iran, which has always been one of our main enemies politically, imminent from happening. What do we do? For me, it's just really weighing on my heart that this is going on, and I feel that there's nothing I can do, right? Because there's a Saudi air campaign and sea blockade, and they're just not letting the food and the medication that is waiting to come in, right? So a third, they're targeting non-military zones and just bombing them, right? And the U.S. is supplying billions upon billions in arms and weapons, saying that they are trying to target Al-Qaeda and Daesh, which is, in Arabic, it's ISIS, right? These rebel groups, especially that are fighting in Syria, ever since the U.S. invaded Iraq, that's really what escalated and radicalized a lot of these groups. So everyone, thank you for tuning into my second episode on Yemen. I hope that people comment on this, or at least start thinking about Yemen a bit more. Every time that you eat, every time that you shower, every time that you take a sip of clean water, just know that, half a world away, half of the population of a country is facing death by starvation. Children are dying, families are displaced, and it's all politically driven. So it's very disturbing. Tomorrow I'm going to be filming an episode, What is Government in General? Also tune into that. It's going to be more of a philosophical standpoint on what is government, why do we have it in the first place, social contract, that kind of stuff. It's going to be really interesting. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.
Lord, we don't need another mountain.